Hi everyone, I'm immigration lawyer John Khosravi. Thank you for joining us today, December 8th, 2021, Wednesday, 6 p.m. for our weekly session going and discussing U.S. immigration law. Happy to have you with us, and your questions will be trickling in as we're going through it. I want to thank you for joining. Importantly, this is just general education, not case-specific guidance. You really should talk with an attorney in private about your case so they can review your documents and give you a good idea what's going on. But if you're interested in a green card, in particular a marriage or fiance type green card, download the Ultimate Marriage Green Card Guide at marriageimmigrationlaw.com. You're going to be amazed of how much information. It's a wealth of information in there. That's really going to help you out in understanding what the process is about. Unfortunately, there's a lot of delays in the immigration system. That's baked into the cake right now. If you're doing consular processing, not so much if you're in the United States, but it depends on your local field office. But with that, let's get it started. All right, as the questions started to trickle in, I just wanted to mention one really important thing is to be very wary of immigration fraud. Immigration fraud happens in many different ways, but in one way is when professionals, people who pose as professionals, try to help you. These could be lawyers, or these could be non-lawyers, sometimes notarios, people who claim to have legal guidance. You really got to check up on people. And the reason why I bring this up is, as you see, I'm on different websites, on Facebook, on Twitter, on TikTok, and LinkedIn, and YouTube, all this kind of stuff. My face is out there, and so a lot of identity fraud happens, or people take my images, create accounts that look like me on TikTok, on Facebook, on various places, and they claim to be me to get you to, give your information and money. And unfortunately, it's recently happened again. This happens. I try to shut it down, but companies like Facebook and stuff don't really help out. They just disregard what I ask them to do. But be mindful, if you're going to be working with my office, JK Law Firm, I make it a requirement that I have to see you and you see me by video. I like seeing my clients. I don't want to do just a voice, a sound I hear over the phone. I think it's really a personal thing we're going to be talking about, so it's very important that we see each other. So if someone claims to be me and says, join this WhatsApp group and we'll talk on the phone or something like that, that's not me. Do research. It's very easy to find my contact information. Just put my name or the firm, either John Khosravi or JQK Law, in the internet, and my email and my phone number come up. And I don't take phone calls from new people, so you really have to email me, and then we schedule a time to talk by video. My email is on wherever you see it, but it's info@jqklaw.com. Wherever you're watching, you're probably seeing this already, my email address. So that's the way to communicate with me. If someone on Facebook says I can help you, as an immigration lawyer, as a lawyer in America, I'm not even allowed to come out and post stuff and say, I'm a lawyer, come and contact me like that. Someone's posting a question. It's against the rules to do stuff like that. So I'm sorry, I've been contacted by people who paid money and they lost money, but you got to do your own research. You got to be your #1 advocate. And if you're going to work with somebody, see who they are, make sure their contact information is correct. And sometimes, they take my image and use my name and stuff, but it's easy enough to put my name and find out my authentic information. So please be very careful and watch out so you don't get that kind of issue popping up. It could be really problematic and troublesome for you. So having said that, the immigration system is, it's just so crazy how some things work so slow and some things work so fast. I have cases right now, for example, in the Middle East that are pending their consular interview over 2 years, and in South Asia and all that kind of stuff. Then I have cases in California in particular. I have naturalization citizenship cases where we submit the case and we get an appointment for an interview 6 to 8 weeks after filing. Now, this isn't every case. I get emails all the time from people whose cases are taking over a year, but I have cases where the interview comes up, 2 months after filing. It's wild. Or I have green card cases for marriage cases, which is the primary thing my firm handles. And they come up 4 or 5 months, they're done. It's incredible how fast some cases have gone, but not every case, For example, one particular kind of case, which is marriage to a green card holder and adjusting status, those typically take over a year, and that's what I've been seeing in LA and San Diego. But in Northern California, I just got 2 of these cases done in about 4 or 5 months. So it really depends on the field office, it depends on luck and all these kind of things. So be prepared. It's a wild situation. These timelines are not consistent. One thing is you have to be patient, and the timelines they have on the websites are inflated. They're not really realistic. But it's hard. I know it's hard taking this long. So let's take a question. Jordan 8350 asks, hey John, good to see you. If I got a J1 visa that was only sponsored by my parents and I do a job like janitor or supermarket cashier or hospitality jobs, will I be subject to the 2-year rule. So you don't get subject to the 2-year rule based on working. You get subject to a 2-year rule based on what kind of J1 you have when the J1 visa is issued. So if J1 is issued, I think you're saying your parents got it and you're like a minor that also get J2, I think that's what you're saying, J2 through them, then you're going to be subject to the 2-year home residency requirement if your parents are. So we have to see who the parent is, who the primary J1 holder is. J1 is called a culture exchange visa, but it's much more wider than that. There's researchers, there's all sorts of things that fall in it, and you could come and work in the United States on it. But depending on which country you're from and what you're doing, you may be subject to something called the 2-year home residency requirement. So they say you come here, you learn something from the United States, you have to go back to your home country for a 2-year period of time, wait there and kind of spread the knowledge you gained in the US before you come back. Now, not everyone is subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. There's certain countries that if the people come with the J1 to get certain skills, they'll be subject to it. Or if they're a medical student on a J1, they can be subject to it, and some minor other areas. So it's something to be careful for because it's a big hassle. Once you're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, you can't file for a green card until 2 years down. You can't get an H-1B, you can't get an L visa. You could potentially go and leave the US, file for a student visa or tourist visa, but you can't do change of status within the United States. It's just, all this stuff becomes a headache. There's a waiver available of the 2-year home residence requirement, but it's difficult and sometimes more difficult than others, but it just goes into the complexity of US immigration law once we get into this J1 kind of stuff. So be very mindful of it, be very careful not to fall foul, but in regard to your question of if you're going to be subject to it, it's not whether you do the jobs what your parents have. Plus, you may not be able to work if you're a dependent of J1. You need your own separate work permit potentially, which they probably won't give. So I wouldn't work as janitor or supermarket anything before making sure that you're not going to fall afoul of some sort of immigration violation for working. So you really should discuss, have a private consultation with an attorney to know more about what's going on in that particular case. But thank you for your question, Jordan. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on the show again and reaching out. So, you know, the U.S. immigration system, as I said, is a lot of moving parts, and a lot of times we have to really dive in deep and review what's going on in people's particular cases. We get a lot of questions, emails, and on the show even, and on YouTube comments about stuff, and it's really hard. Sorry, I got a fly or something, a mosquito flying around my head. But it's really hard to figure out what's going on just by, you know, to have these brief conversations. For example, one thing I've seen people, back in the day when I first started, I would just try to help you with the phone, trying to, like, you know, just be quick, and I found these kind of mistakes happen if we just do it by phone. In one case, a person contacted my office and they said, well, I wanted to do something, I want to get some sort of visa. I'm like, where you're at? They said, I'm in the United States. I'm like, cool, what kind of visa do you have? They said, I'm here on a tourist visa. And I asked them, well, how much more time do you have on the tourist visa? And they said, oh, I have 5 more months. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So we were talking, I told them to schedule a time. They lagged, and 2 or 3 months later, they finally did. And then once they came, I looked, and what happened is they had a visa stamp in their passport that had that 6 months, or by that point, 4 months left on it. But the visa stamp in your passport that the U.S. Embassy gives only gives you time, and the limit of time that they give, sometimes up to 10 years, gives you permission to try to enter the United States, but not to actually enter the United States. Once you reach Customs and Border Protection at the airport, at the land border, or sea border in some cases, you have to get what's called an I-94 issued. And the I-94 is your breakdown of what visa you have and how long you have permission in the United States. And typically for a tourist visa, they only give you 6 months worth of time. So when that guy came to me and I asked him how much more time you have on your visa, he misunderstood it, because that's a typical language use visa, and thought I was talking about the visa stamp. And actually what I meant was the I-94, but that miscommunication happened. But when he brought his passport in, I looked, I'm like, oh no, I don't mean the visa stamp. I went online, checked his I-94, and the guy had like a week left of time, so he had to get out as soon as possible. He could have filed for an extension, and maybe had enough time to do it. But the moral of the story I learned from there is, there sometimes are misunderstandings. I may not express myself properly on the phone. That's why one thing is I like doing video consultations, and also getting people's documents, going to these websites, reading them, spending time, so I make sure the information I give is proper. I don't want to come out and give some information that can be problematic and really ruin some someone's life. So I got to be very careful, and that's why this show is just general education. I try not to go too deep into something that's someone's case, because they could be, you know, mistakes. I don't want to hurt somebody. So we got a question from Nitya. Nitya asks, hi John, good to see you. So good to see you live, thank you. Could you talk a little about the immigrant investor visas and how the process works for someone who is over 21? Okay, we'll talk briefly about it. There's essentially 2.5 types of immigrant investor programs, there's like 4, but 2 of them are halves. I mean, I'll go over the half ones really quick. There's the entrepreneurial parole program, which is, I don't think is really that good a program, but it's very limited number of people who have investors who are investing in them, really Silicon Valley kind of stuff, and they have, you know, professional investors that invest a lot of money. Potentially you get a parole for 2 years and they can work in the company. It's a program that's fairly new. President Obama started it, Trump shut it down, now they've reopened it. We don't really know how it's going to work out. It applies to a really limited number of people. It's not a very clean program in my opinion. There's this other program called the L1 intercompany transfer, and this is when someone works for a company overseas and they're transferred to the United States. The way this becomes an investor visa is because potentially the owner of that company overseas, who works for his company too, might, you know, invest and start a subsidiary branch, for example, or affiliate company in the US and transfer themselves over. So it's kind of a investor kind of visa. But the 2 main ones that we call investor visas is the E2 visa and the EB5 visa. The EB5 visa is what leads to a green card, and that's if you invest, right now it's like $500,000 to $1 million depending on what location you're investing. The price had gone up, there's a lawsuit, it went down, so we're still trying to figure out that the law on this stuff is really murky. And there's a lot of complexity, and I don't think it's a really good program because of how the execution of it really creates a lot of problems for people. But the EB5 program, if you have a lot of money to blow, you can give it a shot. It's going to take a long time potentially. It's not clear whether you'll keep a green card even once you get it. And then there's the E2 visa, and the E2 visa is for people from certain countries, from certain passports, and the country that issues that passport has a treaty with the United States that says, yeah, if citizens of our country come and invest in the United States, the United States will allow them to stay in the US and operate that business. So it's an interesting visa, definitely something to look into if your country, if you have a passport of a country that allows it. And people always ask what's the minimum investment, and there is no minimum for it. It just has to be enough money to run that business that you're going to have properly. So I try to think about it like the show Shark Tank or something in the United States, where people come in with an idea or the business they started and they try to sell the idea to these investors. It's the same thing with a USCIS or consular officer for the E2 visa. They want to see that, you know, you're really going to be success. So, you know, if you're going to make a factory, a car factory manufacturing company, you might need billions of dollars. But if you're going to make a small restaurant in a rural area, you might need much less. So the amount just has to make sense with what you're doing and up to the interpretation of the officer adjudicating the case. So there's a lot of subjectiveness in there, but you want to be really prepared to be able to answer the question and show you, yeah, we've done all the preparation needed. You frankly have spent the money, and both the E2 and EB5, the money has to be at risk. So essentially you spent the money already, and you're gonna get the visa and come and operate. So that's something, there's a lot of risk involved with that, but sometimes, you know, no risk, no reward. Those are a general overview of the immigrant investor visas. I do E2s, not EB5s. But if you're serious about an E2, just reach out and we can have a consultation on that. But thank you for reaching out, Nitya, on LinkedIn. I appreciate it. So Mohammed asks, hi, do we need a green card and foreign passport to go to US Virgin Islands for travel? Well, US Virgin Islands is part of the US. You technically don't need either, but I would never not travel with the foreign passport and the green card if you're going to travel. It's a bad idea. Problems could happen. So even though US Virgin Islands is part of the United States and you could travel there, I would not do that without taking my green card and my passport. You definitely need identification, and so just bring it. I wouldn't leave home without it. I wouldn't travel essentially semi-internationally without it. Now I gotta double check whether US Virgin Islands is in the US. I'm pretty sure it is. There's a bunch of these islands like that, that part of it, but let me double check. US Virgin Islands, INA, Immigration Nationality Act, a group of Caribbean unincorporated organized. I mean, it's part of the US. So let's see. Immigration. In the Immigration and Nationality Act, I think it lists what falls within the US. U.S. Virgin are unincorporated, meaning only select parts of the United States country provide residents. Yeah, individuals born in the U.S. Virgin Islands are considered citizens of the United States, according to this random website. So again, I can't give case-specific advice. I have to look up to see whether U.S. Virgin Islands is considered the U.S. I'm almost sure, but I don't want to give that guidance till I check. I haven't gone to US Virgin Islands. It's not something I typically deal with, so I don't want to jump out and give some certain information. But whether it's regardless of the fact whether it's part of the U.S. or not, I would not take my passport and green card if I were you. It's a way to go. One of our regular listeners, Abiodun, says, "Hi John, very educational program. Thank you so much. I've been good to see you again. We have a good group of regulars that always come in the show, so I appreciate you reaching out." So it's really interesting how the U.S. is set up now. Just a little bit of history of background. The United States, started with 13 colonies that spread across the U.S., and then the U.S. started getting a little greedy and wanted its piece of land and stuff and took over Hawaii. But in the around 1900, they had the Spanish-American War, and in that war, Spain lost, and the U.S. took over a lot of the territories that belonged to Spain, their former colonies that they had. So Puerto Rico was one of them, so it's part of the United States. So if you are a green card holder and you travel there, I mean, it's considered part of the United States, so technically you could travel just like if you're going from California to Texas. But again, I would recommend bringing documents because you might have a customs officer to deal with, which could be a problem. But there's all these other places like Guam and I don't know, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana or something like that. It's not something I typically deal with, but there's all these little places, nuanced aspects that the U.S. picked up in these wars and in other, colonial kind of stuff. And the Philippines has a strong history, which is very sad what happened with what the U.S. did there. And the Spanish were doing there for a lot of years. So, but the U.S. picked up and had a lot of influence areas, but there's certain countries that they picked up and they're really close with. I don't know about U.S. Virgin Islands in particular, but Puerto Rico is something that comes up because I have clients who are here who file for adjustment of status, a green card. And when you file for adjustment of status in the United States, unless you have an H-1B or an L-1 visa, you're not allowed to travel internationally or to stay in the U.S. And sometimes couples are like, well, we want to go on our honeymoon, we want to go on a vacation, we want to go to Puerto Rico. And they get worried, is that a problem? Well, directly going to Puerto Rico is not a problem because it's part of the United States, but two things. You might have issues, so it's better to have advanced parole. And the second thing is, because you might run into someone's going to hassle you. But second thing, it's very rare, but sometimes your plane might need to make an emergency landing in another country. So let's say you're flying to Puerto Rico and somehow you have to go to Canada. Or I'm in California, sometimes there's an emergency landing, you have to go to Mexico. Once you leave, the case is abandoned and you might have to stay outside. There's a case of a flight attendant who had DACA, deferred action for child arrivals, and I believe her plane had to make an emergency landing in Mexico. And if you're here unauthorized and you have DACA, and you leave, you're stuck outside. So this person on their job was forced to go out, and now they're stuck outside. They probably have to get humanitarian parole to try to get back in. Humanitarian parole, a special program. We get contacted a lot about that, especially from Afghan nationals who are escaping what's going on there. The stats that are coming out is like 28,000 requests for humanitarian parole were made. Only like 200 have been approved. The government made a lot of money. It's had a very high standard. So it's a little bit of a mess and you want to get caught up in that. So we got a couple of questions that popped up that we'll get to. Nazia asks, "Hi John, how much income do we need if we sponsor family members? What happens if we're not working or have low income?" Well, if you're not working or have not enough income, then you'll need what's called a joint sponsor, or if you have a lot of assets, potentially you could do that, but usually a joint sponsors need another person that's going to take on as well the responsibility of an affidavit of support sponsor. But how much you need depends on your family size, on your household size, and if you've applied for someone else in the past. So we'd have to calculate the household size that exists. There's a form called I-864P, and so you have to look at that form depending on where you're living and seeing what the minimum number is. So for example, if you type in form I-864P into Google, and the first thing that should come up is the website 2021 HSS Poverty Guidelines for Affidavit Support from I-864. And they separate Alaska and Hawaii. They have different financial things for there, but let's say you're in mainland, and I was early in the show talking about what's considered part of America. This actually specifically says, so for the affidavit of support, it says if you're living in the 48 contiguous states, excluding Hawaii, Alaska, District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. So those are stuff we talked about earlier. They're part of the United States. But if you're living there, and let's say you're a person that got married with a foreign person, you want to do affidavit support, you have no kids, you're not on your tax returns, the U.S. person is not doesn't have any dependents. So it's you and the foreign person. The amount you have to make right now is $21,775. This is December 2021. Now inflation is going to happen. These numbers are probably going to go up. But let's say, you know, you're married and you're bringing like a brother in, so it's like you, your spouse, and you bring your brother in, that's 3 people, the number jumps up to $27,450, and essentially there's $5,000 more per person after that. 5,000 like 500 or something like that. So that's it. And if you don't make enough for that, there's calculations that you could do. Potentially, if you're low income, you don't make as much. You could subtract the amount you make from that level and then multiply what's left by 3 or 5 depending on who the person is. It goes into these formulas, it's complicated. That's why in these kind of things it's better to schedule a consultation with an attorney to talk about in more detail. The advocacy support is really confusing. When people file the case on their own, usually that's the most confusing part I've seen people have and most difficulties is with the affidavit of support. Peaceful Heart asks, what your preference now, fiancé visa or marriage I-130? You know, 9 out of 10 times a marriage case is better, but it's not based on necessarily my preference. It depends on the facts of the case and what's going on in your life. So we really have to base it on that. But if you want to learn more, download the Ultimate Marriage Green Card Guide at marriageimmigrationlaw.com, and you can learn a lot there. But generally, a marriage case is better because there's less steps to it, so there's less fees and less interactions with the government. Plus, if the spouse is overseas, and which I assume they would if they're doing a fiancé visa, once the foreign spouse enters the United States, they immediately have their green card issued. Whereas the fiancé visa, they enter the U.S. and then, you know, they have to apply for adjustment of status after getting married and wait to get the green card and work authorization. So, and there's just more cost to it. So I usually don't like doing the fiancé visa, but it depends on the case and what's appropriate for that case. Dr. Mott asks, hi, my EAD has been under process for 9 months. I'm on a 180 extension now. What can I do if my extension period ends? I'm C9 category. You could try to contact USCIS, request an expedite, contact your local congressperson for help. But it sucks, these delays are horrible, and it just becomes so important that, and nowadays, because we know these delays are happening, to file the EAD extension as soon as you can. So if there's like 6 months left on the EAD, you can file for renewal, do it immediately, so you have that 6 months of case pending, plus another 6 months 180 extension, so almost a year of extra runway for the case to be processed, because we're getting these kind of delays right now, and it's horrible. So it's just, yeah, I mean, keep sending the expedites and contact Congress people. If you have a good reason why you need an expedite, it's there. But this is a typical problem we're seeing for all cases right now with the EAD taking a while. Which field office are you working for your adjustment case? Maybe you'll just get the green card approved, so that might just happen. But that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. How long does I-485 case take? Well, this question is not specific enough. It varies, so it depends on what the basis of the I-485 is, whether it's what kind of work visa it is, which category it is, if it's family-based, what it is, and then also which field office you're dealing with, because every office is different, and frankly, it just depends on who gets your case. So I'll have the same, very similar kind of facts, go to the same office, and one gets done in 3-4 months for I-485, and one takes 2 years. So when you ask how long it takes, you know, 3 months, 4 months, 2 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, that's a real honest answer of how timelines are. Anyone that tells you any different from that is trying to just make you feel good. But that's the reality of these kind of cases. Bobby asks, I'm a citizen living in Virginia. I applied for my wife in Iran. Should we rely on processing timelines? USCIS website, for example. Processing times for Texas is 10 months, for California 24 months. How accurate are they? Not accurate at all. And how should we rely on these processing times for different states? They're not reliable at all. I get Texas cases done in 6 months. I get California cases done in 7 months. There's no reliability on these timelines. Your case will probably take around 10 months, between 6 and 10 months for the I-130 to be approved. The bigger problem is your spouse in Iran. So we don't know how long consular processing is going to take for an Iranian case. Could be 1 or 2 years easily. So be prepared for that. It's a long haul when you have an Iranian spouse. So I want to thank everybody who joined us. It's the end of our show today. If you're interested in scheduling a consultation, my email is info@jqqlaw.com. But more importantly, wherever you're watching, please like, subscribe, and follow the show. It helps out a lot. So thank you everyone for joining. Download the Ultimate Marriage Green Card Guide at marriageimmigrationlaw.com. And I'll see you all next week, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, here to take general educational kind of questions about U.S. immigration. God bless, be safe everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this educational video. You'll find our social media site has a lot more videos, images, and information about the U.S. immigration process. Please check those out on the various social media websites.